In Module 11 and Module 12, we're going to be studying plants. A lot of the things that you need to understand about plants, you're going to pick up pretty easily just from reading the text. But the piece that is a little bit more difficult to understand, and the piece that I'm going to be focusing our video time on, is called Alternation of Generations. There's a couple of terms that you need to remember from when we were studying cellular reproduction. A couple of those terms are haploid and diploid. Haploid is when you've got a cell that contains just one of each chromosome, where diploid means that you've got two of each chromosome, okay? So you need to keep that in mind. And you need to remember the difference between mitosis and meiosis. Mitosis is when cells divide and they make exact copies of each other. You have one cell and it will reproduce, it will make two cells and they are the exact same as the original cell was. When a cell goes through meiosis, however, you have one cell that ends up becoming four cells, and the initial cell is diploid, where the final four cells are haploid. And that's, as you will recall, that's how egg and sperm are produced from a regular cell. So those are terms that you need to have under your belt, because we're going to be referring to those again. And so in Alternation of Generations, we're actually going to be talking about four different major classifications of plants. On the last page of your lesson plans, I actually have placed a branching diagram there to show you how the plant kingdom is divided, how it divides into the different areas. And so you may want to look at that as you're going through the chapter to kind of keep the overall structure in your mind. Today, I'm going to talk about what alternation of generations is. In alternation of generations, a plant has both a gametophyte and a sporophyte generation. Okay, this is for plants. It's not for most of the other organisms that we've talked about, but it is true of everything in the plant kingdom. The purpose of a gametophyte generation is to make gametes. And gamete is another word for your egg and your sperm. And you should remember again that egg and sperm just have one copy of the chromosomes. And so they are what we call N or haploid. And so after the gametophyte generation produces the gametes, the egg and the sperm will fuse in fertilization. They will fuse to make a zygote, which then grows into an embryo and eventually will grow and become a sporophyte. The sporophyte generation has all diploid cells, and so those are called 2N, they're diploid. And eventually, as that sporophyte generation grows and matures, the purpose of the sporophyte generation is to produce spores. In order to produce spores, these cells need to go through meiosis. And so once they divide and go through meiosis, we have spores, which are now, again, part of the gametophyte generation and are now, they're haploid or N. And so it sounds funny initially, but the spores, as they grow and mature, are going to go through mitosis, not meiosis, to produce the egg and the sperm. How can that be? Because before we always said, well, you have to go through meiosis to produce an egg and a sperm. Well, that is the case. If you start with a diploid cell, you have to go through meiosis to produce your gametes. But we've already got spores, which are already in the haploid. They're haploid in the number of chromosomes that they have. And so since they're already haploid, they're going to go through mitosis and just make more copies of themselves. And then some of those will develop then into the egg and the sperm. Okay, so you've got a cycle that rotates, and you're going to continue to see this same cycle over and over again as we go through this chapter. But it's going to change slightly between your mosses and your ferns and your flowering plants and your conifers. Those are the four main classes that we're going to be talking about. And so it's going to be the same basic cycle, but there are going to be changes within that particular cycle. Okay, so let's go over it one more time. The purpose of the gametophyte generation, which is haploid, is going to be to produce the gametes, which are egg and sperm. The egg and sperm fuse in fertilization to make a zygote, which grows into an embryo, which grows into a plant that is then called the sporophyte generation. Once it fuses and becomes the zygote, that cell is now diploid, and so all of these cells down here are diploid or 2N. Eventually, you're going to have some of those cells that are going to undergo meiosis, and they're going to produce spores. So the purpose of the sporophyte generation is to produce spores. The purpose of the gametophyte generation is to produce gametes. Okay, so that is the basic overall idea of alternation of generations, and we will put some more details with that as we go through the different types of plants as we go through the module.